Okay, let's make an official start. So a warm welcome to everyone that's dialing in. My name is Matt Cameron, and I'm the CEO and head of membership here at LGBT Great. I'm joined today by a number of amazing colleagues. So many of you will know Alex Scabbets, our executive director and head of advisory, who runs a lot of these sessions. So a very familiar face to you all. We've also got his colleague on the line as well from the Insights and Content team, the team that helped produce all of these amazing materials and indeed led on the response to the regulators paper. So we've got Shreyas Dutra on the line as well. Give us a wave, Shrey. And then we've also got Callum as well, Callum Reed, who's our events and marketing manager, who helps make all of this technology hopefully work. So good to have you on the line as well. And then we've also got Lauren Cahill, who's our head of operations and engages with lots of our members across a number of our empowerment programs and also helps make everything work our side as well. So excellent team with us all today. Now there are some sort of new folks that are joining. So I know we've got a lot of people that perhaps haven't joined one of these sessions before. We've also had a string of new members join recently. So I just thought it was useful to share a bit of a snapshot here in sort of front of you, just really around what LGBT Great does. And everything that we do is about supporting and empowering the LGBTQ plus community within the financial services and professional services industry. And the way that we do that is by, helping organizations with the right information, the right data, the right awareness building tools to really drive forward their strategies with impact. So there's kind of three things you can see here as part of our organization. So corporate membership is where we spend a lot of our time at the moment. LGBT Great Careers, our talent attraction solution, and also our new advisory solution as well, which focus on specialist projects and transformation programs within organizations. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a snapshot. I guess today's session really is going to be a series of conversations, workshops, engagements that we have with members around the regulators paper around the LGBTQ lens that we think is needed on the regulators' proposals. And of course, whilst this is the UK regulator, we believe actually a lot of the principles are very foundational, no matter what jurisdiction, country we are working in. So I think there's a lot to be learnt. I guess my own reflections on the regulators' sort of proposals is that it has gone pretty far. I think it's quite a bold move by the regulator to do this. And certainly if you look at other, regulators around the world, this can be considered as leading within this space. That being said, our sort of position at LGBT Great is that it does fall short in a number of areas around inclusion and recognition of LGBTQ plus people. And Alex is going to be taking us through some of those specifics in the sort of second part of today's session. And we've got some interesting sort of slide content, insights content for you as well. Now, a key part of being, I guess, a part of LGBT Great is enabling the work that we do. So our members are all members of LGBT Great, partly to support and empower their own LGBTQ plus strategies internally, but also to be a part of change, broader change for the industry more widely. So whether it's through increasing visibility across the industry, building a new pipeline of talent for the sector, informing policy and advocacy such as this. It's really fantastic to have so many members now part of the community, and we look forward to sort of continuing the work that we do. And it's really in that sort of sense of togetherness that we want to sort of position today's sort of session. So we've got 5 broad objectives today. So we're going to aim to provide you a snapshot of the themes within the regulators paper. We're going to give you an insight into our response that we compiled as part of our push last year to get a response on behalf of our member community. The third point then will be around showing you how a lot of the features of membership and work that we do can support organisations to meet some of the new regulatory requirements. The fourth point is to stimulate thinking and sort of collective aspirations on goals for the next sort of 3 years. And the fifth point, to explore a little bit more about what you would like to see from an LGBTQ perspective across the industry in the future. So we're going to be looking at sort of these sort of 5 aspects of today. Okay, before we get into the interesting bit, which is what was in the sort of our response, and looking at some of the LGBTQ plus nuances, I just want to take this quick opportunity just to sort of refresh everybody that's joining the call around the key themes that we saw emerging from the regulators paper. And really that can be sort of broken down into 5 sort of key areas. And this sort of supporting slide here will provide some context around this. I do need to do a cheeky plug here. You can actually download a copy of our submission using this QR code, which is available to you. But really, there's 5 broad areas or focused areas that the paper brought out. And the first was around sort of the concept of sort of embedding non-financial misconduct considerations into the existing regulatory framework. The second sort of theme we saw emerging was around clarifying diversity, inclusion, governance, and accountabilities. By embedding D&I into the existing senior management function, so the SMF responsibilities, and making sure that actually responsibility and accountability for DE&I sits with the executive committee and or the board. The third point was around ensuring that organisations have a robust and data-driven, evidenced DE&I strategy, and that strategy is published. The fourth point was around the setting of diversity and inclusion targets and effectively embedding them into the strategy. And then finally was to introduce new annual DE&I monitoring, regulatory reporting and disclosure, so reporting across the industry. Great. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. There are a few ways in which you can engage with us today. So you can engage by the chat function. We're going to be bringing you the Slido as well shortly. And there's also the Q&A as well. But hopefully that gives you a good context for today's discussion. And at this point, I would like to invite Alex to join me sort of in conversation. And he's going to be taking us through the next sort of couple of slides. So Alex, if I can pass the baton over to you, and look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everyone. Sorry, I was just trying to get the link and was sending the wrong link, so technology not being my friend. Yes, I appreciate that this slide deck does have quite a lot of words in it, but I thought it would be quite useful, and I want to take a screenshot of that to kind of read later. The full report is available. In terms of what I wanted to do first, before we actually dive into our recommendations to the FCA directly, is to explore a couple of polls just around the confidence level that currently you have on the call today. I can see that the technology is working, so that's good. So just generally, how confident are you with understanding and articulating the proposed changes to the policy expectations today? I can see that so far I've not been engaged, but have existing awareness of DE&I, coming out, broadly understand the salient points. Very confident with all of it, only 6%. No engagement at all is 0%. Would like to know more. Is that you don't want to know more, or you've had no engagement? That's a good question. But no, it looks like that have not been engaged, but have an existing awareness of DE&I is where we're sat, and I think that's broadly in line with what we expected. For those that maybe are not based in the UK, obviously this is an important development in the regulator's position on DE&I. There was a consultation period of a few months where all organisations or individuals were able to provide a formal response to the proposed policy changes, which we did as well expressly from an LGBTQ plus lens. And I got kind of the 4 main points that we made, which, not without wanting to try and boil the ocean, we're not going to be able to change everything that the FCA wants to do or is intending to do, but our focus is really just on dialing up the sensitivity around LGBT DE&I. So for those people today who have not been engaged directly but have a broad existing awareness of DE&I, there's quite a lot of things in here that will be relevant for you, just in generally in terms of the thinking, because it will be you who have to implement whatever policy changes come into play. Broadly understand the salient points, so I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are, when we get into some of the detail around what we've said. And somewhat confident is excellent. I'm very confident with 3%. Where are you, the 3% people? I want your thoughts on this. If you said very confident with all of it, please do feel free to challenge us to ask questions or to put your thoughts into the chat function or the Q&A box as we go through today. But that's good. Thank you, everyone. I've got one more poll for you before we share some of the first aspects of our response. And I've obviously not told you what all of the strategy elements are, but how ready do you think your organization is to implement the required changes, whatever they may be, proposed by the FCA around DE&I strategy? Broadly, as Matt mentioned, this is around the implementation of a strategy kind of from zero, kind of enhanced accountability and responsibility frameworks for stakeholders at senior management level, enhanced reporting requirements for firms around DE&I data, amongst other things. So I can see that somewhat ready, but specific actions need to be taken. It's almost if you read the cheat sheet for this set of surveys that we wrote, which was that's probably what we expect everyone to say. So that's good. In terms of 4% not ready at all, significant foundational work still left to be done, and very ready have already made a start. They're kind of showing at the bottom. So obviously the extremes are, fewer and further between. The normal distribution is is as expected. So somewhat ready, but specific actions need to be taken, I think is exactly where we anticipate most organizations are. In the work that we do, we see a wide range of maturity from an LGBT DE&I perspective. So we see all of you, many of your firms will have completed our central benchmarking program, the IBIT, which looks at LGBT DE&I maturity. That's a useful, we'll talk about that later, but that's a useful framework to keep in the back of your mind if you're joining from an organization that may have never heard of LGBT Great before, or if you're considering membership, as understanding what you need to do relative to what the proposed changes that might come into effect are, requires you to do a bit of work around establishing a baseline understanding of where you're at. And the tools like the IBIT and other sorts of benchmarks can be foundational work there. And for that 4% of people, neutral just moved up a bit. I don't know, did someone change their mind? For those 4% of people who are not ready at all, significant foundational work still needs to be done. Please do feel free to get in touch after this call if you actually do want to talk about LGBT DE&I with us. This data exists, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. So the people who have said that, let us know if you would like to talk about some of the work that we're doing, because we might be able to help you there. Okay, thank you for indulging me in those two polls. I'll move now on to kind of sharing with you, again, I appreciate there's quite a lot of text on these slides, but I wanted to give you a sense of what we said in the report. There are 4 main recommendations that we made. I think in the end it ran to about 18 or 19 pages, so we've tried to boil it down a little bit for you. The first was really tied into data, and was really a mandated, our recommendation was to mandate explicit LGBTQ plus DE&I data capture for regulated firms. So for those firms who are 251 employees or more under the FCA PRA kind of size kind of cohort, this is kind of going to be mandatory. But for smaller firms, you can volunteer to essentially be held to the same level of standard as larger firms. The FCA were, I would say, pretty forward thinking and aggressive is not the right word, proactive in demanding the mandated inclusion of data around gender identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, disability status, were the kind of main areas of mandate. We think that the FCA and PRA could be more LGBTQ plus inclusive here by not separating out, but being more nuanced in its exploration of biological sex and sex assigned at birth and gender identity, as having those as 2 separate questions that are both mandated categories. This is to explicitly to include trans non-binary people in the conversation. Go back to your LGBT DE&I 101. The foundation of an LGBTQ plus identity is sex assigned at birth, gender identity, sexual orientation, and gender expression are kind of the 4 ways we think about people in the community. And obviously expression, we're not going to mandate any capture around expression, but the other 3 should all be mandated categories. At least that's what we're recommending. There will be some firms, and probably indeed there'll be some people on the call today who think that that's too far, that we don't necessarily need to mandate that. It should still be voluntary. What we're saying is that it should be mandated for capture, but that we should also mandate the prefer not to say disclosure as well. So that's not to say that everyone. Oh, there's a question come through that I just want to read at this point. Having read through the consultation paper for reporting return, is inclusion of no response something of a cop out for organization? That's exactly, I think, a very salient point at this stage is the hesitation that people have around this area is saying that, well, I don't want, as an individual, my organization to hold data against me for whatever reason. I don't have, comfort around how the data is used, etc., etc. At the regulated, industry-wide level, we would obviously like to understand what the demographic makeup of the industry is, what the demographic makeup of senior leadership teams is, etc. Mandating, a more comprehensive LGBTQ plus data approach is the perfect way to kind of get that data that just doesn't exist at the moment. Mollifying it a little bit, if you then mandate the inclusion of prefer not to say data as well, then, and if there's a campaign around comfort, my hope is that will decrease the level of discomfort amongst employees, but that will still give us usable data, because the prefer not to say, I think this is a point that if Shrey wants to jump in, the prefer not to say here is a bit of a barometer for organizational comfort. So our recommendation was that the 3 categories of data on the screen should be mandated, but so should the prefer not to or the disclosure of prefer not to say for these categories, and they should both sit together. That was something that we didn't see as explicit in the paper, but is something that we've kind of added as one of our recommendations. Shrey, I know you and I were talking about this topic earlier. Do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think so we ran a study which collected proprietary data across 7 countries and 1,800 respondents, and we had a lot of trans, non-binary, and intersex respondents as well. And what I found interesting in that data set was that only 12% of the trans, non-binary, and intersex folks said they had no concerns at all in disclosing their D&I data to the potential employers. So I think that speaks volumes as to how they're not very comfortable. And someone who's non-binary, I also assess the organization. But what I'm trying to get to is that because this is an FCA consultation paper and they set sort of the standard for the industry, right? I think, again, prefer not to say is a very good barometer for comfort/discomfort in an organization. So for example, if I say prefer not to say in a survey, I'm basically telling them that I'm not really comfortable disclosing my identity. And I think because it's an FCA consultation paper, the basic standard should be very forward-looking and future-proof, given that Gen Z is so diverse and Gen Alpha is predicted to be even more diverse. So if you want to be future-proof, I think that is definitely a mandate of having prefer not to say and having that barometer disclosed.
Completely agree. There's a couple of questions that have come through on this topic, and obviously I knew this was going to be an area where people had lots of thoughts. I'll address the question that came through in the Q&A box first around, could you explain more around why you think the phrasing as we've used it, biological sex/sex assigned at birth, in those terms, it should be mandated? Wouldn't gender identity not be more accurate? Mandating biological sex just attempts to boil down people to their sex assigned at birth, and there's also an issue with biological sex here too. Yes, I agree with you completely. So we've had to use the terminology that the FCA has already used. Personally, I would like to have gender identity, sexual orientation, and then the question, do you identify as trans, as the way that we explore that. That's my preferred approach. That's the way I use it in all of our internal surveys, all of the surveys we send externally, and all of the market research data that we approach. So I personally don't actually, I agree with you. I don't think that should be the thing, but using the categories as they have described them, we kind of had to respond in kind. We've had in the paper, we do talk a little bit around the terminology that being not quite as trans and binary inclusive as it could be. That we don't even get talked to in the intersex community, which is absolutely not represented here at all. But yes, so that was kind of, I agree with you, the person who raised that question, and that's not my preferred, but it is in line with what they've already said. Matt, I can see there's some chat going on. Do you want to come in on any of that, or should we move on to point number 2?
Sure, yeah, happy to add some just a couple of inputs into that. I think one of the big issues that certainly I sort of saw with the paper was the mandating or recommendation to collect sexual orientation data, but not collect gender identity data. And I know from conversations that you and I and others have had with member firms as well, including people that do identify as non-binary and or are trans as well, is that there's this sense from a lived experience perspective of, does the FCA care more about, sexual orientation than it does around gender identity? How is the regulator recognizing me? Which I think is a really important point to consider. Hence, why we feel it's important that there's parity, between both, and particularly with the consideration as well around the increasing number of people that are identifying as part of the community. We see around 21% now of Generation Z identifying as part of the community. So it's definitely something we need to see very clearly in sort of diversity and inclusion data collection. I'd add a couple of points as well that prefer not to say. I mean, of course, it's everybody's right to prefer not to say and not to provide the data if they don't wish to do so. I think what we have seen in a lot of organisations is sort of common themes around the challenges to collecting the data. One is definitely sort of apathy around, what's the data used for? Why is this important? I don't have time to do this. I haven't seen the email, etc. The second point that we tend to see as a sort of a barrier to this is then around trust, and actually trusting what the data is going to be used for. And quite often, both points 1 and 2 are sort of intrinsically linked to, how has the organisation communicated to me about the request, and connecting that to the why as well. So I do think, prefer not to say can be, think about accountability here for improving DE&I in organisations. Everyone on this call, what we have data on is what we focus on. The classic phrase of what sort of gets measured gets done type of thing. But without an indication of the data points around representation, it's very, very difficult, of course, for us to see, where we are in terms of our representation. And secondly, then thinking about the inclusion data as well, because without those two things, we really are sort of punting in the dark in terms of informing sort of the strategy. So I do think the prefer not to say, it can be used as a barometer of how effective is those accountable in organizations, EXCO and or the board, at, making sure there's a clear campaign, around what the data's for, why it's needed, and advocacy around that. And what I can say, if we back that up by sort of lived experience and sort of case studies that we've seen across the industry, those organizations and those EXCO and board members that have got a authentic command of being able to talk around the data, connect it with the why, connect it with empathy, and role model their own practice of giving their data, those are the organizations that are really now increasing disclosure numbers across their businesses. And we've seen, clients go from 30% starting out all the way up to sort of into the 90%. I can also say as well from the work that I do with the diversity project that similar interventions have also been hugely effective at providing the clarity, the transparency around why the data is needed and the effectiveness. So I think on that basis, I'd say, prefer not to say is a really good test of how effective the organization is, at communicating its DE&I strategy and the reason that the data is important. So apologies, Alex. That was a bit of a keynote and a monologue. So I'm going to pass back over to you. But hopefully, there's a couple of helpful points in there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I can see the comments coming in around, the prefer not to say. Why don't we just have a no option or a blank option, or I refuse to answer? I think that the kind of Occam's razor response, simplest answer here is that you either choose to disclose and then you disclose, or you prefer not to say. Is kind of double counting in a way if you do blank or no. So I think the kind of the line, as far as I'm aware, is that the prefer not to say represents that as either I would like to leave this blank or I would not like to say. The thing with mandated data is that if everyone has to then complete it, then at least we get a sense of what that comfort level is. So it's kind of, they're all very valid and I think appropriate responses. Will be interesting to see what the FCA actually decides. I know that some of the things that have been said in the chat or have been said to the panelists around, prefer not to say versus no response, have been suggestions to the FCA. Obviously, we're putting across our view on, an expressly LGBTQ plus focused response, but we haven't commented, for example, a lot around disability inclusion data. So there's a whole other category of data there that we're not covering. So from an LGBT DE&I context, our feeling is that if we mandate this, then at least we get the richest data set that is then usable. There's a question that I think is a really fair point here, which is, do you think that Megan has put in that the FCA may hold it against firms which have a low comfort level and prefer not to say? I don't think the FCA has said anything about kind of penalizing based on reporting rates. All the conversations I've had have been around understanding what the industry looks like in more detail, rather than penalizing firms expressly for not having, for having a very high, prefer not to say rate. There's probably some softer work that can be done around comfort levels through culture-based initiatives, inclusion work, comms, openness, transparency. If the industry had 100% disclosure rate and everyone had 100% comfort, then that would be very interesting and usable and reflective data. So I think that's kind of obviously the utopian end state we're gunning towards. But I don't think it's being seen currently as a penalizable or enforceable area. But this word barometer keeps being bandied around, but by us and by others. But is definitely kind of the focus area, is trying to getting a sense of where the comfort levels are and then working as an industry to kind of improve those without necessarily kind of penalizing. Okay, I'm going to move us on. I think at this stage, I can see there's still more questions coming through. So it's obviously, we might circle back to some of these questions at the end once we've got through all of today's session, and we'll take these questions away as well. Matt, team, I think we should probably collate these and maybe think about a couple of responses as a follow-up. Shrey, certainly I know that you and I have thoughts on how we word the gender assigned at birth, etc. Sex assigned at birth. Okay, great. I'm going to move us on to another poll, as you've been listening to us for quite a while. So we've kind of touched on it, but I would like to actually get your perspective now on which of the following demographic data categories do you think should be mandatory for an organization to collect? This includes, in the broadest sense, the prefer not to say as well. Is that working? Oh yeah, that's working. Okay, straight away, none of these should be mandatory.
Interesting to see what comes through here. Got a few at the bottom there, which is great. So which of the following demographic data categories do you think should be mandatory? Yeah, give you a few more seconds just to get your votes in there. Interesting, we've got a tie at the top there, Alex. Of course, so it's worth sort of spelling out as well. One of the key areas that we didn't see referenced in the paper was, of course, the dimension of social mobility, which we are keen to ensure that is also reflected in there as well. 36%, yeah. And actually, from the reporting project, the Diversity Project Goals and Progress tool, we know generally across the financial services investment savings industry, social mobility is the one area that is really falling short for most organisations, but there is a high level of intentionality around improving disclosure around social mobility. So there is definitely appetite to improve it. And while I was waiting for a few more votes to come through, I did sit on a sort of a case study a few years ago with a law firm actually that focused purely on social mobility as the strand, and what they actually saw was a huge increase in diversities representations improvements in lots of other facets, dimensions of diversity. So it's very interesting to see, by broadening it out in terms of social mobility, that the attraction strategy really diversified based on that focus. But yeah, so we've got a few more votes coming through. Like, so 81% race and ethnicity, closely followed by sexual orientation, 65% gender identity tied with disability there. If we just pop down to the bottom, what have we got coming through? So we've got veteran status, yeah. Caring responsibility status, other data as well, 15%. So yeah, I think, look, it's obviously very strongly a strong view here on, so the sort of top 4 there, very, very clear. I think gender identity, we could probably take from this, well over half of you think we should be, the regulator should be collecting data on that indicator as well. So some interesting sort of thoughts there. Okay, let's pop over, if we can, Alex, us onto the next slide, and let's just spend a couple of minutes talking through recommendation 3 and 4. I'll pass back over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, and I knew that's fascinating. I'm going to look at that data later. Interesting that 19% of you said none of this should be mandatory, and then 13% said, or 13% of the responses included other data as well. So I'd be interested if you did say what other data you'd like to see. Kind of be interested to understand what is included there. In terms of our kind of third and fourth recommendations, obviously the first two were kind of linked, given that they were focused around data. 3 and 4 I kind of do also kind of see as being linked as well. So the third one was really around clarity and expansion of what's included in the non-financial misconduct kind of examples that were given. So none of this kind of really was expressly LGBTQ plus sensitive. It obviously covers it, but I think there is an importance of being quite explicit here. The words homophobia, biphobia not there. There was some things around exclusion, covert or overt exclusion based on gender identity, presentation, sexual orientation, those sorts of things. So I think that this is where kind of the language and the softer elements of the regulators power can be brought to bear here in demonstrating that inclusive language, inclusive examples, then kind of hopefully encourage a sense that this is a policy or set of policies that is supportive expressly of the community. So our third recommendation was kind of for an expanded set of examples. Obviously, it doesn't have to be War and Peace, but I think a little bit more work could be done on kind of the non-financial misconduct piece. There's obviously some challenges with non-financial misconduct as an approach, given the kind of what happens outside of the office space, which I think is reasonable. How enforceable this is a kind of general question. I know that many people have been kind of talking about, but our position was very much just on the examples that were given in their kind of wider documentation. Matt, team, do you want to come in on that and open to
Sure.
anyone on the call as well?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I'm just want to sort of pick up on a point, actually, really good point that's just come through privately here. So not all trans folks identify as trans. They could have an identity different to that assigned at birth, and being trans may be how they got there, but it may not be their identity. So I think that's a really good perspective there. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's really interesting, isn't it, around this sort of the misconduct, non-financial misconduct that was sort of featured in the paper, and just to echo some of your sentiments. There was no reference there to non-financial misconduct against LGBTQ plus people, or reference to that. But we do know from previous sort of data surveys that we've run that sort of banter, for example, is a big point for the community, and the number one concern actually incited in some data. And then general sort of, when we say banter, homophobic, transphobic banter was one of those things that was reported quite frequently within the industry, particularly within sort of very sort of male-dominated environments, heterosexual environments. So that came out as a strong theme. So I think it's not best practice for the FCA to be talking purely through examples of gender-based or misogyny, etc. I do think they need to be broader in how they portray that non-financial misconduct could play out within organisations. So that's what I'd to I think to sort of that point. And I think you're right here around D&I strategy. Making sure that there's equal representation and focus around LGBTQ plus within organisations. We tend to see still in many businesses massive focus around the G, I'd say followed by the L, and then trailing behind would be the B, and then we have sort of trans and queer plus identities kind of over here. So I think there's definitely a need to ensure that all parts of the community are reflected, heard, because at the moment they're not. And the reality is, the industry in terms of the community is full of people like me who are white, gay, cis men. But actually, what we're not doing is ensuring equally across the industry that there's representation and inclusion of other parts of the community as well. And that's one thing that I feel very strongly about, that we need to work harder and be more innovative in how we ensure that people in more nuanced aspects, broader parts of the community, are also accounted for as well. So a few other things sort of coming through. I'm just going to take a quick second, Alex, just to see if there's any
work, then that is illegal. So we're talking here about the more. No, we're back on. Some of the for want of a better word, softer elements or less overtly discriminatory elements. So we're talking about inclusion here or exclusion. We're talking about inclusive language rather than exclusive language. Calling someone a slur is very different to refusing to use someone's preferred name or pronouns, for example. It's just one example, but both of those are inappropriate. Well, one of them's expressly so, and one of them you may have a perspective that is, oh, that's probably fine. What harm can it really do, type of thing. So there is a clear-cut line, not always understood, I think, but there obviously are very clear boundaries set under the Equality Act around what constitutes discrimination, harm. But there is a grey area as well. And I think some of the work that we're trying to do together as an industry is to understand how companies can ensure that grey area, which leads to impacting people's psychological safety and feeling of well-being and at work, is not negatively impacted. So it's some of that area really. But yeah, that's just in terms of the relationship between. Most of what we're talking about is kind of sat in that grey area because the clearly defined limits are, clearly defined beyond us. Hope that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Shrey, is there anything you want to build on or improve on there from your perspective?
No, yeah, I think everything that Alex just said, I echo that completely. And again, this is something I personally also understand, because enforcing so obviously there's hard and fast rules even in the Equalities Act, and then these are sort of softer exclusions that people do, and it is very hard to sort of measure that and also like act against it. And this is one of the general problems that I've personally also faced, because people can misgender you, but then they'll the sorry is so sort of fake. And then that obviously gets to you, right? But again, how do you police or enforce that, or ask people to actually stop doing that? So again, I think personally we have to go back to training and education. But yeah, again, enforcing that is always a question that comes to my mind as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Shrey. And I think just to sort of pick up on a few points, I think off the back of that question, the Equality Act's DE&I regulation here, I think absolutely, bearing in mind how the regulators tend to work, they will closely be looking, or will closely have looked at the the Equality Act, and that may or may not have informed their response, their consultation papers. I think it's quite interesting that social mobility is not included in the Equality Act, and it also isn't included in their consultation paper. So one could argue that there could be kind of a link potentially between those two things. I also know as well, in terms of looking at the detail around the cost benefit analysis, and that was part of the regulator's discussion paper. I know a lot of the third party systems, I think this was picked up by one of our members actually, Andrew earlier on, was around, what's the capacity and ability of, systems to actually provide data. So I know, for example, Workday have been looking at ways in which they can include a social mobility module on the platform, and that's come off the back of lots of organisations essentially getting together and saying we need this. So I think there's definitely strength in numbers and that sense of sort of togetherness that can be quite effective. Much in the same way, actually, that as we're doing here, strength in numbers and sort of putting collective sort of views and sort of positions forward. But yeah, ensuring the systems can do it, I think, is absolutely right. I led a piece of work a few years ago on looking at a sort of a review of how organizations were equipped to collect diversity and inclusion data. And one of the findings out of that was that a lot of organizations had systems which had diversity, equity, and inclusion modules built into them, but they didn't have it switched on, which is a huge risk reputationally. Think about having it but not having it switched on, and a missed opportunity. So I think ensuring and working hard with third-party systems is really important. And I know from some of our super sort of senior DE&I leaders, there's been a relative pushback in terms of those providers as well, in actually making making available what you need. So don't be afraid, I think, to push back quite strongly. And also, if there's something that isn't working for you, whether it's around LGBTQ or whether it's around another dimension of diversity as well, please do let us know, because chances are if you're having that issue, others are as well. So there could be an opportunity there to help bring together voices, etc. I'm going to sort of plow on with a little bit of pace here. We're coming to the last sort of 10 minutes of this sort of session. There's a few of the points come through sort of privately, one around sort of working practices, another around shift patterns. So to quote, would be helpful for all protected characteristics. For example, I last checked, hardly any investment banks, financial services advertised part-time working. So there's this sense that the regulator could do more to lead by example, which I think is an interesting point. The UK Civil Service collects this data each year as part of their annual staff survey. So yeah, I think in answer to that, I think we're starting to see more organisations now collect data around working practices, part-time working. We're seeing, I'd say, slightly more organisations starting to advertise part-time work. We're seeing job shares as well become a little bit more prevalent, but we're really only on the cusp. I'd say, as an industry, at really exploring that as an opportunity to diversify the sort of talent pipeline that's sort of coming through. So thanks for all your inputs on that. As Alex mentioned before, we will sort of download all the points that come through. We can't, of course, get to them all sort of in this session, but I do appreciate you sort of sharing those. I want to get you all thinking again with us as we go into the last sort of 10 minutes here. So let's pop over onto the next Slido question. So what barriers to implementation do you see for your organisation? So what barriers to implementation do you see for your organisation? So you can select one or more of the below there. So we'll give you a few seconds just to start sort of casting your votes. So we've got the first few sort of coming through now. So thinking about barriers, obstacles, challenges. So budget is, yeah, we're hearing that one all over the place at the moment, which will come as no surprise given the challenging year, which of course was last year. Followed by poor disclosure. We're swapping around now. So poor engagement, understanding of the business case. Yeah. DE&I resource is also coming up quite strongly there. Thank you, Alex. Don't see any barriers to issues implementation yet. A few people still, again, unclear around that as well. So while those are coming in, 1 second, we've got a couple of other points coming through. So another question come through here, which I'll quickly read out. So much of this policy is created from the perspective of reducing harm, important, no doubt. I'm also interested in hearing you speak to what you think recommendations might look like if they were expressly approached with the intention of supporting and flourishing queer folks from a perspective of supporting queer joy, for example. So I think what I take from that question, yes, it is around obviously leveling the playing field, reducing negative experience within organizations. In terms of directly sort of supporting, empowering the LGBTQ plus community, flourishing of queer folks, to quote, this is the I guess the work that LGBT Great focuses on most of its time. So empowerment programs, talent acceleration programs, looking at how we can recognize, support talent to get new skills, mentoring, a really big part of helping people to thrive within organisations as well. So I know within the paper there's also a section on inclusion questions, looking at employee sentiment, sort of these types of things. So I hope what we will be able to achieve as an industry is get the collection of data right around LGBTQ. We then can look at that and compare that sort of intersectionality around different sort of experiences from an inclusion perspective as well. So there could actually be some really interesting data here if this actually gets off the ground sufficiently, that looking at sort of the patterns and the differences between what is the experience of LGBTQ folks versus non-LGBTQ. So we've got another sort of comment here. So around our HR system, the biggest barrier to collecting data. So absolutely hear that loud and clear. Looking at the poll results as well, so insufficient budget allocation, lack of employee engagement. So I guess these two things could be sort of linked. Having the budgets to do this in the right way, of course, will impact the ability to engage employees and do that effectively. Poor engagement and sponsorship from senior leadership. I'd say we are really seeing that as an emergent theme at the moment. So we are starting now to hear from organisations that want to, empower, support, make confident that their leaders in terms of being able to talk around the importance of this. We also tend to see as well with leaders and senior sponsors that there's this natural sort of position of they're senior, they're in a position of power and privilege, and they're exceptional at what they do. But actually, what we don't sometimes take into consideration is that actually in a lot of this space, a lot of these spaces, this is all very new. So there's a relatively low level of confidence, I think, around doing this the right way. A few of the points coming through here around getting an overall percentage participation up to statistically reliable rates across the whole population requires multiple repeated pushes. Absolutely. To need to make the case for straight allies to complete the data. Absolutely. And Martin, I've noticed you've popped that out to everybody there. So that's Martin, one of our exec sponsors from BlackRock. Absolutely, multiple pronged approach here. I was talking to Hayes, the recruitment firm, recently. Obviously, huge business, but they've gone, to a 90. Well, they've achieved a 90% disclosure rate now across their workforce over a 5-year period. Really, really interesting how they've achieved that. But every time they talked around inclusion, people, there was always a little link to the why and hey, complete your data here. So it does show that over time, role modeling good practices, providing, regular forums to provide the data. And then getting the people in power, which are quite often, let's be honest here, are the straight allies in the exco and sort of leadership positions. They're the folks that can really, create some safety and confidence and momentum sort of around this. So thank you for sharing your thoughts there. We're going to spend the last sort of couple of minutes now just thinking into the future. And I want to sort of invite you all here, if there was sort of a future state of what you'd like to see within sort of the financial services industry for LGBTQ plus inclusion, equality, diversity, what might that look like? What should the focus points be sort of in the industry? And I think this starts by looking at best practices, successful examples of what you may have seen or observed. So this is going to be a little bit different, a bit of a word cloud. So drop us a couple of sort of words in here. So this might be around policy. This might be around recruitment. This might be around awareness building, training. It could also be around talent acceleration programs. It could be around policy, etc. Apologies, Alex. You just corrected me there. This is an open text, not a word cloud. Sorry, you did tell me that before. Super. So we've got a few of you that are typing away, which is good. Let's see if we've got a couple of pertinent points that are coming through here. So showcasing LGBTQ plus leaders. Absolutely, we need more of those outside of the G. We've got lots of, well, more of the G than we have of the LBTQ and plus. So definitely more focus on that. Very strongly, I think awareness building is coming through as well. I think leadership training is really key. Got mandatory DE&I training, benefits and policy are coming through, which is great. Sharing practices from the wider business. Yeah, other parts of the business. I think I pick up on that point as well, is that we tend to see DE&I sitting with DE&I, where there is a resource, or the network. However, what we don't tend to see is a real effective integration across other parts of the sort of the business. I know one of the things that we strive for with LGBT Great is that we have a contact in the network, we have an exec sponsor, we're talking to recruitment and talent attraction, we're talking to marketing and comms, we're talking to the front office, etc. So lots of points coming through now. So all these ideas are like buses. So once we get one, we get 10. So thank you for sharing your thoughts there. Awareness building, treating LGBTQ inclusion the same as other dimensions coming through as well. Practical integration into our everyday organization. Love that, whoever that was. Thanks for sharing. Great inclusion of LGBT ethnic minority, intersectionality of identities. Yeah, could not agree more. And I think actually, you know, we tend to see separate focus on LGBTQ plus and race and ethnicity. And one of the things we've got planned actually for the end of this month is a history month webinar that will focus on Black history in the US and the intersection with LGBTQ plus history as well. Of course, it's History Month LGBTQ here in the UK. And then those 2 dates swap around in October. So in October, you've got LGBTQ History Month in US and Black History Month over here. Why we can't be aligned on these things, I don't know, but a piece of content for you there. And Callum will share our upcoming events with you as well. Positive reinforcement, good data leads to positive action. Yeah, absolutely. And this is the whole point why, you know, why transparency is so critical. Brilliant. So we've got some really good sort of thoughts and inputs from you all there. Thank you for those. We're going to go into the last Slido of the day. You must be all Slidoed out soon, but we will provide you with a snapshot of what all of these polls are saying. So considering the future of LGBTQ DE&I in financial and professional services, where do you think the main focus of the industry should be? Perhaps a couple of examples to stimulate your thinking here. So whether it's thinking around leadership and accountability, whether it's integration into DE&I strategy. We've got to hear a focus on trans issues, talent advancement. Yeah, I think that's the important one actually when we think about talent development, because you know we know there's a lack of out LGBTQ plus leaders at that sort of exco, a couple of levels down, board level. Where they do exist, of course, it's a focus on the G. So again, how we get talent that maybe is more junior in organizations, developed, accelerated, empowered through their career, I think is kind of key. So recruiting's coming out quite strongly. Emphasis on equity. Yeah, so removing the barriers of folks getting progress or providing pathways to get them there as well. So development, recruiting's coming through. So again, quite closely aligned there to talent. Intersectionality, very loud and very clear there. Corporate advocacy, yeah. We do see in financial services, very risk-adverse businesses does limit, I think, the amount of corporate advocacy that we tend to see generally on social issues, but I'd say especially with LGBTQ. We have seen, actually, I'm going to comment on that. So a lot of our businesses that are US headquartered, we have seen a real step backwards in visibility on LGBTQ plus because of pressure from third parties, investors. That has been a theme this year. So we are seeing a step away or a step backwards on that in many domains. Sponsorship, yeah, we've got opportunity here, or creating opportunities, I presume that means. Dedicated promotion plans, empathy through training, gender neutral facilities. So yeah, ensuring that the workplace is set up, being clear on the message. Super. Focus on culture. So lots of different, I think a lot of this actually is touching different aspects of organization. So I think a big focus on people and talent for sure, through to that corporate advocacy, the sponsorship piece. So again, linking that into leadership and accountability. Mental health focus we've got here as well coming through now. Somebody else has also said promotion plans, stronger allyship also coming through as well. Great. If you've got any other sort of suggestions, please do pop those on there as we go through. And just to take you on to the last slide as we move into the last 2 minutes of today. We've set out sort of 5 considerations for you as organizations in terms of from here. So you can see these sort of set out clearly sort of in front of you. Again, if you do want to talk about any of these, feel free to drop us a note, and indeed any of the issues, questions, queries, points that we've explored on today's sort of session as well. We will make a copy of the slides available, so members will get those fairly imminently, and we'll make them available sort of more broadly after then. There are a number of different sort of focus groups that we plan to do on this topic. We're getting a lot of appetite at the moment, particularly from members around engaging their exec teams on a lot of this data as well, which we will do. So if you are interested in bringing this conversation into your organization, that is something that we would be happy to support and facilitate you with, particularly if you are looking for sort of a snapshot insights from the broader industry and what your peers are doing. So thank you. Thanks for the comments coming through as well. I'm glad you thought it was thought-provoking. It's always good to see the number of attendees sustain sort of throughout these sessions. So thank you very much. Lots of really good points also coming through as well. There's so much good stuff coming through. I want to sit and read it, but I probably need to concentrate on closing this session. So thank you very much for attending today. We look forward to following up with the supporting materials and taking the conversations forward. On behalf of the LGBT Great team, thank you very much and have a good day. Thank you.